Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. With moments like Pete Rose's 44-game hit streak, Willie McCovey's 500th home run, and the Bucky Dent homer, 1978 was an incredible year in baseball. We had David Krell on earlier to talk about his Bo Belinsky book, and we were thrilled to have him back to talk about 1978. Krell not only goes into the baseball season, but also that year's pop culture, and how 1978 produced such big personalities and memorable moments we still talk about. It gives you a full picture of what it was like to be a baseball fan in 1978. Enjoy. Welcome back to the podcast, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So we just had you on to talk about Bo Belinsky, and now we are talking about 1978. I guess my first question for you is, how do you have two books come out within months of each other? Are you working on both of them at the same time? What was that process like for you here?
It sounds more daunting than it is. Actually, it was a benefit because as writers, we tend to get tunnel vision. And when you look at the same page, the same chapter, day after day, week after week, you start to find problems that don't exist. And you're just creating more work for yourself. Working on 1978 for 2 weeks and then going to the Bo Belinsky book and working on that for 2 weeks. It helped me get some separation. It helped me walk away because I had something else I needed to do. I couldn't just walk around the block or go to the gym. I needed to do another assignment. And then when I went back to the other book, I looked at it with fresh eyes and I could be more objective about it. And it helped me get out of that world. 1978, Bo Belinsky wasn't playing. Bo Belinsky played in the majors from 62 to 70. So I was in two different time periods, two different areas of culture. The Belinsky book does go through the 90s and 2001 when he passed. By and large, the baseball corpus of the book was just 62 to 70, and 78, of course, was just 78.
So you've written a number of books now about specific years. What is it about specific years that you like, and how did you settle on 1978?
Well, 78, I settled on in a writing workshop about 13 years ago or so, and I had put it away when I started to work on other projects. And when I was between projects, I said, what about this 78 proposal I worked on? Let me dust that off. Let me see what I have. And I had to gut it. A lot had to come out and I had to rework it. But the bones were still there. As they talk about houses, when they say the house has good bones, it just needs to be renovated and updated. That's what I needed to do. I needed to strip away what didn't work. There was a lot going on. I needed to streamline, just focus on a few major themes and send it to University of Nebraska Press, where I've had a couple of books published. And thankfully, they said yes. Working on a year is very easy in terms of formatting because it's January through December, and you just have to find enough baseball to carry you through a majority. And usually stuff happens in the off season that you can cover. It's not 100% baseball, but I would say it's probably about 70-30.
So I know with the Belinsky book, for example, you didn't get to talk to Bo. Obviously, you talked to some people around that. This book, my takeaway is you mostly relied on, sources from the time, quotes from the players after the games. What was your thought process behind that?
Well, it's tough to get a hold of some of the players, but even if you do, you're asking them to recall events that happened 45 years ago. They might not recall them. Their memories might be fuzzy. Sometimes I've interviewed people and the person has said, this is what happened. And when I go back to two newspaper sources and I say, no, that's not what happened at all. This is what happened. There becomes a conflict. So I really wanted to put you as the reader in the context of 78. This is what you would be reading. This is the quote that was in the paper from July 10th, 78 or August 4th, 78, whatever it may be. And put enough research in to flesh it out. Not just say this is what this person said or this is what happened, but how many games behind the Red Sox were the Yankees at this point? What was Jim Rice hitting at this point? What was the team batting average for the Red Sox? What did Tommy Lasorda say during spring training about the competition? What did the competition do the year before? Put things in context so that you have a better picture rather than just me cherry picking quotes, which anyone can do. But the real artistry and challenge, I think, Scott, comes in putting everything together in a contextual analysis, a contextual picture. As with 62, as with 66, I wanted you to get a flavor of what life was like for a baseball fan in 78. If you were alive then and you can remember it, it will remind you of what was going on. If you weren't alive or were too young to understand, it will put some things into focus. And I hope that when you read the book, either way, it inspires you to do more reading about the late 70s.
So you look at Bo Belinsky, and Bo Belinsky also kind of crosses over into the pop culture world. And this book also very much situates the reader here, not only within the baseball world, but what else is happening in the 1970s at that time. Can you, I'll let you take as long as you want with this. Can you sort of situate what is happening in 1978 in the country and in baseball?
Sure. Well, baseball was a fantastic year. You had Pete Rose's hitting streak of 44 games. He did not meet Joe DiMaggio's 56-game record set in 1941, but he tied an NL record. Willie McCovey hits his 500th home run. Tom Seaver gets a no-hitter. There are lots of exciting things happening, culminating with the Yankees coming back from being 14 games down in mid-July, forcing a one-game playoff with the Red Sox for the AL East. Part of that comeback was a 4-game sweep at Fenway in September called the Boston Massacre. Yankees won all 4 games in that series. Bucky Dent and Reggie Jackson hit home runs in the one-game playoff. Yankees win, go on to beat the Royals in the ALCS, and then the Dodgers in the World Series after being down 2-0. In popular culture, you had disco. Disco was beyond prominent in the culture at large. Top 40 radio, Donna Summer, her song Last Dance, which is still played today at every bar mitzvah, confirmation, wedding, prom, wedding anniversary, corporate gathering, reunion. It's the song that lets you know this is it. After this, we're getting our coats. We have to say goodbye to the hosts and leave. Disco was fun. It was fun. You want to get up and dance. You want to express yourself. Well, that's a perfect antidote to what happened in the country for the past 20 years. Vietnam War, I think 58,000 servicemen died. God knows how many thousands came home emotionally, physically, or mentally wounded. You had assassinations of John F. Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy in 1968. You had Watergate, which forced President Nixon from office. A lot of his aides went to prison. Inflation, an oil crisis. This country had been through the ringer. So disco was an antidote to that. It's fun. Couple that with nostalgia, which was big in 1978. 2 movies in particular. The Buddy Holly story, American Hot Wax, both set in the late 50s about the early days of rock and roll. Buddy Holly, rock and roll pioneer, dies in a plane crash with the Big Bopper, J.P. Richardson, and Richie Valens. And that happened in Iowa in 1959. Alan Freed was a popular DJ, first in Cleveland and then in New York. The reason the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland is because of Freed. It's an homage to him. It's an honor to him. And Freed died in 65, but he was tremendously important in elevating rock and roll, putting on these shows at the Paramount Theater in Brooklyn and other places. There were movies about rock and roll. So you had those two evoking nostalgia. Animal House was set in 62. The soundtrack for that movie took you to a different place. It took you to the early 60s. It was a time of anything can happen, possibility, optimism. Kennedy as president. We're going to outer space with John Glenn as part of the Mercury program and so forth. You had a lot of these things going on, plus Happy Days set in the late 50s, top 10 show, top 5 show in most weeks in the late 70s, and Robin Williams becoming an overnight star because of a guest spot as an alien on an episode of Happy Days in February of 78. And unfortunately, we just learned yesterday, as we're taping this, Lonnie Anderson passed away. Lonnie Anderson played Jennifer, the receptionist, on WKRP in Cincinnati, which debuted in 68. It was a show that was a high-quality show, 4 years on CBS. There was later a spin-off in the early 90s that was in first-run syndication. Rather than portray her as a prototypical dumb blonde, Jennifer was largely the most influential person at the station, the most strategic, the smartest, and I think the highest paid next to the station general manager and owner. So there was a lot of entertainment value going on in America. And I mentioned the late 50s. We can't forget Grease, which was a top movie, also set in the late 50s. You had some other wonderful movies. Heaven Can Wait, which is a remake of Here Comes Mr. Jordan. In the first one, he's a boxer. In the second one, he's a football player played by Warren Beatty. You had Hooper, Burt Reynolds playing an aging stuntman. Everywhere you went, there was great entertainment, whether on the radio. I mentioned Donna Summer, also Billy Joel. You had movies, and of course, baseball. And those were the cultural backgrounds to our lives. You went to school, you came home, you listened to the radio, you turned on the ball game, you talked about sports with your friends. If you were an adult, you listened to the radio, you came home, watched Happy Days with your family, or you watched the Mets game or a Yankees game, or wherever you live, a Dodgers game, a Cubs game with your family, with your kids. It was just an antidote to the everyday pressures that we all have.
Feel free to disagree with this, but it seems like baseball and its place in the country is very much changing at this time. This is right before, Magic Bird, Jordan start joining the NBA. The NFL is kind of beginning its ascent here. It's not the cultural end-all be-all that it is today at this point here. And you mentioned some of those baseball players earlier, your Seavers, your Roses, kind of having these sort of like last hurrahs, this nostalgic kind of like last gasp here. Where is baseball in America at this point? Does it hold that same place that it did 10, 15 years ago as we enter this free agency, starting to see these sort of money grab kind of things going on? Where is it at this point?
I think it is still the national pastime as basketball marketing got more sophisticated, as Michael Jordan entered the league later on. Before him, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, as you mentioned, those great Celtics-Lakers rivalries were so imperative to elevating basketball. Remember, in the 70s, basketball championships were on tape delay. They were on 11:30 at night. It was Saturday afternoon, a prime time offering that it later became. So baseball still has a hold. Monday Night Football was huge in the late 70s. That's what the whole nation watched. You were subject to your regional programming on Sunday afternoons, but Monday Night Football in the late 70s, there was nothing more powerful than Howard Cosell announcing those games. So baseball still had that hold on the emotional aspect of our lives. Also because with the Yankees and Dodgers in the World Series, you're only 20 years removed, 25 years at most, from the rivalry that defined the 1950s. So you have parents telling their kids or grandparents telling their grandkids about Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford and Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese. The Yankees-Dodgers matchups started in 47. If you want to be technical, 41. There was a Yankees-Dodgers World Series. Dodgers never won in Brooklyn until 55. That was their only World Series championship in Brooklyn. But you had a lot of nostalgia going on too. And you can't help that. That's what the sports programmers are going to talk about. Hey, let's show footage of Don Larson's perfect game. Let's show footage of Johnny Padres winning Game 7 of the 55 series. The nostalgia factor, Scott, is so important for baseball at that time because the country was more unified culturally, less divisive, less offerings. We didn't have nearly as many offerings. You had 3 channels. In New York, we had 5, 9, and 11 as independent stations. And sometimes there would be a quasi-network movie you would find out would be the same movie that was on the Philadelphia channel or the Boston channel, et cetera, because these channels were owned by station groups. So they might buy programming in a certain package. But you didn't have Fox. You didn't have CW. HBO was just beginning to be a ubiquitous form of network in people's homes. I remember HBO had something called On Location, which was so exciting. It was a comedian, and they would film the performance and just put it on the air. So it could be a David Brenner in Chicago. It could be Robert Klein in Detroit, wherever it may be. That was exciting. You never saw that. You only saw these guys on The Tonight Show. You never saw them in their actual comedy club atmosphere. But HBO didn't have the programming that it now has. It was just movies that were on the previous year. And like I said, less entertainment offerings, less time to dilly-dally. I mean, there was more conversation going on. Kids today, they don't exercise. They don't play basketball in the driveway. They don't throw the ball around in the backyard. A lot of it is apps and video games and so on. People work longer today. We don't have the same opportunity for those conversations that we once had and the downtime that we once had.
Most people who lived through that baseball season would have thought that the Pete Rose streak was going to be the story of the year. Obviously, the ending is pretty incredible, but I wanted to start with that Rose streak and really kind of his, he leaves after the year, which is also an incredible thing.
Well, yeah, that's due to a conflict between him and Reds management. There were several teams vying for his services, and I write about that in the book. It's amazing to think what he could have done with the Expos or the Mets, but he wanted to go to the Phillies. He wanted a contender, and he led them to the World Series in 1980. Pretty amazing accomplishment. The guy was a competitor. And they also lost Sparky Anderson, the manager, that year. So things were becoming clear to me as an 11-year-old kid that nothing is forever, that this is a job, that just because you're used to it as a fan doesn't mean that they're going to get used to it. I would get my baseball cards and line them up just like my friends, and you would see players go from team to team. But there were certain players that were inviolable. You didn't think that Pete Rose would ever leave Cincinnati. When you listen to the announcers, and he debuted in the 60s, I wasn't even alive in the early 60s. What's going on? That's amazing. And now he's leaving? He's leaving? Devastating to the fans. I understand that as I get older, it's not just about money, and it's a lot about relationships and respect, and there's friction, there's conflict. I didn't think Tom Seaver would ever leave the Mets, but he left in 1977 for Cincinnati.
Yeah. I want to go back to Rose's hit streak really quick. What was that like? What was the media coverage? Were people heavily invested? Did they think he was going to do it? What was that? What was that whole scene like?
When it got to 40, people, I remember, were talking about it. It was my first year at sleepaway camp, and the head counselor every morning would come out to the flagpole and read the scores from the night before. And when Rose got to 20 games, 25 games, it got interesting. When he got to 30 and 35 and 40, we're all talking, and we all read the same books. We knew about Joe DiMaggio. So we said, hey, do you think he could do it? 40, these 16 more games. I mean, he got 40, 16 more. That would be amazing if he breaks it. And we thought as kids that he would. I thought that he might. I wasn't sure. No one's sure. But I thought, geez, he has a 50-50 shot. If he's at 40, he's got a really good shot at breaking 56. It didn't happen, but it was exciting. And it did mark the year for that time until the Yankees comeback. You're quite right. When the Yankees came back against the Red Sox and that one-game playoff at Fenway Park and the Yankees win, it was devastating to Bostonians and New Englanders, but it just capped an overly dramatic year. Remember, Billy Martin was so temperamental. He resigned in July. Now, you and I can say, well, he really got pushed. He said some not so nice things about Mr. Steinbrenner and Mr. Jackson, and you can read about that in the book. A Yankee executive said, if he didn't step down, I would have fired him anyway. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. In comes Bob Lemon. Bob Lemon, Hall of Fame pitcher for Cleveland, had managed the White Sox. He institutes calmness. Calmness always wins over chaos. So he treats the men, as professionals. And little by little, they start to win. Boston starts to falter. And that 4-game series in Fenway was just a crucial turning point. They battled it out. It turns out they tied at the end of the season.
You know, there are two players, very different players on the Yankees that season who have pretty incredible years. I mean, the year starts off with fans throwing Reggie bars on the field. You know, Reggie Jackson is kind of the face of late 70s baseball, I think. But I want to talk about Ron Guidry.
Wow.
Ron Guidry has just
dominant.
One of the greatest seasons from a pitcher. You know, this stick figure of a man out there has just a dominant season. What did you learn about Ron Guidry when you worked on this?
Well, in his memoir, he talks about the night he struck out 18 batters. And I guess technically 18 strikeouts because some batters might have struck out more than once, a game against the Angels in June. And he said that's the game where people started to stand up with 2 strikes and 2 outs. It happened on that night. And now it happens throughout baseball. 25 wins against 3 losses is an incredible output. Just unbelievable. For the Yankees to not be where you think they might be in the first half of the season with a pitcher of that caliber shows you how up and down the season was until Martin left and Lemon came in. And Yankees didn't want to be there. They didn't want the tension. To a player, the ones who were quoted that I found in the New York Post, usually a player would say, I don't want to be here next year. And the quote would say, stated an unnamed Yankee, stated a player who wishes to remain anonymous. That didn't happen. They didn't care. Print my name. I'm tired of this. Let me go somewhere where the media pressure isn't as great, where the tension between the ownership and the manager isn't as great. Like I said, you have to give a lot of credit to Bob Lemon, but also the team. They were resilient in the second half of the season. And not only that, to battle back and then have to face the Royals, a tremendously underrated team. You beat them. Now you're facing the Dodgers again, and you're down 2-0. You're facing Tommy John. You're facing Steve Garvey, Davey Lopes. These are terrific ball players. Down 2-0, they battle back to win 4 straight and take this series in 6 games. It was pretty exciting to live in the New York area at that time, I could tell you.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And obviously Bucky Dent is still a name that you don't really say in Boston. I was at Fenway on Saturday, and it's
not without the middle name which was bestowed upon him that I shan't say on your podcast for decorum purposes, but they just can't stand him there.
Mm-hmm.
Almost 50 years later, they mention it to people who were alive at the time, and they will shake their heads and wince.
There's another guy I wanted to talk about. One of my absolute favorite parts of the book. It comes from Tommy Lasorda, as I imagine a lot of great things in the book come from. Let's talk about Dave Kingman for a minute.
Yeah.
Dave Kingman is, how would you even describe him? Just a power hitter that we don't quite see anymore. Or maybe they're all like Dave Kingman now, honestly. I don't know. It's one or the other. He's a special player. And there's a great time in the sort of... Another quote that you're not going to be able to say on the podcast.
Right. You can find it on YouTube.
Yeah.
You want me to recount what happened?
Yeah, I would love to hear a little bit about this. Yeah.
So Dave Kingman was my favorite player growing up. We had the same name. We had the same initials. And when he played for the Mets, I just loved it because there was a 50-50 chance he was hitting the ball into the bleachers. 442 home runs in his career, 236 batting average. I still think he belongs in Cooperstown because of the home run total. None of my friends agree. In 78, he's playing for the Cubs. He hits 3 home runs in a game against the Dodgers. A reporter after the game asks what I believe to be a benign question. What did you think of Kingman's performance? He might as well have been asking Tommy Lasorda, what's your favorite meal at Dan Tana's? Lasorda takes such umbrage. He gets so full of ire at this question. He starts talking about, I shouldn't say he talks about it. He starts going after the reporter using several permutations of the F word and taking his frustrations out on a reporter who's simply asking, what did you think of that offensive display? And any other manager in baseball would say something like, what a threat in the batter's box. What a tremendous power. What a powerful batter. God, what can you say about Kingman? I mean, 3 home runs in 1 game. That's astounding. Only a handful of guys have done that. Lasorda goes on for 90 seconds on this poor reporter, and you can hear it on YouTube. You can't see it, but the audio is there.
It is just phenomenal, and I think somehow very fitting for the time and the place and what was happening, and I just love that.
But I bet you if a kid went to Dodgers spring training and it was a Dodgers-Cubs game and the kid was wearing a Cubs hat, I bet you Tommy Lasorda would say, that's a great organization. They've got great players. I'm sure with the public that he was much more docile, much more encouraging, much more fraternal. But in the clubhouse, no, all bets are off.
I guess this is kind of I want to end on this question here, and
okay,
kind of a bigger question here. When you think of 78, what should we take away from 78? Whether that's from the baseball or from pop culture? What is 78 kind of left us with?
I think it was one of the greatest years in America for baseball and pop culture. You had the things I mentioned with star players, Willie McCovey, 500th home run, Hall of Famer, Tom Seaver, no-hitter, Hall of Famer, Reggie Jackson in the World Series, in the playoffs again, Hall of Famer, Tommy Lasorda, despite the, you know, the outrage, icon, Billy Martin, icon, Bob Lemon, an icon. And then on the culture side, it was a slice of a time where things were just going along as you thought they should. Burt Reynolds was following up Smokey and the Bandit, and Jill Clayburgh was in a movie called An Unmarried Woman, and she was following up some hits. You had a certain amount of groundbreaking with An Unmarried Woman. Today, not a big deal, but in 1978, a very big deal. Husband leaves her for a younger woman. She has to navigate dating, sex, jobs, friends, raising her teenage daughter without her husband. And it's a great New York movie. It's a great movie about resilience. Happy Days took you to a simpler time, along with some of the other movies that I mentioned. It just seemed, as I recall, Scott, to be a fun year. And there wasn't this pressure that we have today where there's a divisiveness that people on dating apps say, if you're for this party, swipe left or swipe right. Nobody cared back then. People just didn't have the time. They just wanted to do their thing and enjoy themselves. And it was a time when people looked out for each other. It was a time where we were coming out of an experience that had tested the country's resolve, whether you were a kid or an adult. If you were an adult, you lived through it. If you were a kid, you heard about it. I wasn't really cognizant of Vietnam as a young boy, but when it starts to creep into primetime TV, when you see a guest star who is a Vietnam veteran, or somebody who, like later on, Magnum, for example, was a Vietnam veteran, and you start to learn a little bit about what the country went through, there's just a sense of, I don't want to say naivete, because that's the wrong word, but there was a sense of comfort that I got from going back to my childhood, going back to those newspaper accounts, Sports Illustrated, movies, TV shows. And it just seemed like we were all culturally singing off the same song sheet. Jerry Lewis had a Labor Day telethon. Bob Hope seemed to have a special every few months. You knew that your parents watched Johnny Carson, and you would hear that he had been around for 15 or so years, since 1962. So there were these touchstones that were always a part of your life, and baseball too. When you see the broadcasters, Phil Rizzuto, for example, with the Yankees, talking about playing with Mickey Mantle, talking about having dinner with Joe DiMaggio the other night, there was a continuity to the past that sometimes we just don't. If we have it now, we don't appreciate it. It's not as resonant as it once was. And I think that that's because we're bombarded with social media and so many choices. And if I tell you I saw a great TV show, you can tell me, well, great, David, I'll stream it. I'll watch 7 episodes. There's going to be a rainstorm this weekend, so I'll catch up on 7 episodes. We're not experiencing things at the same time like we used to. It's gone. And it's a horrible thing. As much as I praise the power that we as consumers have, there is a downside to this, and that shared cultural experience is gone. And that's a lot of what held the country together, that you were all watching it at the same time. You were all watching Monday Night Football at the same time. It was an institution, and it was appointment television. And we've lost a little bit of that. So I hope that reading this book will bring people back to that time and give them an idea of what life was like for the baseball fan.
That was David Krell. His book, 1978, Baseball and America in the Disco Era, is out now. Coming on to close us out is Paul Doty, reading his poem, Wet Socks.
Wet socks. Wet shoes and a rain delay. The sky over Boston broods like a Puritan contemplating pleasure. And for the pleasure of a spring baseball game, we've traveled a few hours from the north, past mended walls and stands of birch trees reaching for errant pop-ups. The weather a zephyr with bladders spent, stuck, and only the two of us in the rows of red seats, a furrowed field of inattention, the sodden city dulled. There is, I guess, a serenity in a large space scoured of its usual crowd, the quickened pace of the city in the rain, and the echo of the near-empty ballpark. A wrong-way respite, years ago, sprinting through the snow in Converse high tops, feet soaked, gloves and balls soaked. Spring ball and what's left of winter, with shouted laughter and lilting profanity, recriminations, and then standing in the snow, a life-changing kiss. Tongues exchanged like lineup cards, standing in sweaters, hands on each other's elbows, on the first moment alone all day, relief pitching. Road games to home games, it's now sunny day catch with 4 children confirming seductive shared wet sneaker feet walk the first base line to a life. Missed in Boston and we don't surrender, grandstand, infield row 3 seats, our sneaker-clad feet too wet to fly. We are sitting in the rain. Why don't we leave? We're safe if we stay.
We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. Until next time,